One of my viewers got in touch with me to say that his local supermarket, one of the newer variety that we've seen in this country, has decided to reduce the amount of meat that it has available in its counters. And it was suggested that this could possibly be enforced vegetarianism, if I can say the word. And one of the reasons that we hear about this business of meat being reduced, of course, is the concept that animals being farmed are bad for the planet. The methane and the fertilizer required to maintain a landscape in which animals are on the planet is very bad because of the CO2 that it is emitting, which of course is part of the man-made global warming myth that we've been sold over the last 20-30 years. The continual outpouring from every part of the media and the government and all its plans, this continual nonsense that the planet is warming up to the point that it would be so disastrous. And these prophets who've been telling us for 30 odd years that the planet is going to warm up if we don't do something, and yet it hasn't. And yet they'll still tell us that it's there, and it's as if they don't believe that we can actually look out of our own windows and see that there is very little change over the last 30 years. But of course it's relentless, it's being thrust on us, and so animals, of course, and farming in general is being pushed under the metal, as it were, and so yes, supermarkets are sort of being pressured, I think, from nefarious sources probably to try and maybe push towards a more plant-based diet. Now, I'm not saying for 1 minute that a plant-based diet is not a good thing. I actually think it is a good thing. I think that vegetables and fruits are absolutely essential, and those raw ingredients should be something that we look to. But I don't think that meat is as bad as everybody is making out. And in actual fact, I would rather trust man. I would rather trust man from generations ago. The whole thing about the old way of farming. Now, anybody who's listened to my videos in the past will know that I very much love the old farming techniques, smaller farms, mixed farming, in which you have animals and you're growing crops. Because in the old days, if you go back to the very old ways of farming, everything was there, everything you needed. You didn't need to go and buy or outsource very much. Indeed, all these fertilizers and pesticides and insecticides and things like that. You could achieve so much on the farm itself. Okay, you wouldn't be getting the same yields that many farmers expect to get now, but the farms were not huge industrial businesses. They were ways of life. People worked on the farm, they were part of the farm. The farm was there for the local community, not trying to sell their stuff all around the world. Yes, some bits might be shipped up to some of the larger towns or the cities, but also the local community, the villages around the farm itself. And those old ways of producing food in which the animals, you would grow the crops for the animals in turn, whether they be sheep or cows or horses or pigs or chickens or geese, would also be producing fertilizer for the land. And the whole thing was self-contained pretty much. You would grow enough to be to subsist yourself, but also to provide for the local community. And we've lost that. We've lost that sense of where the food comes from, what the food is, and that it was local. And the other thing, of course, is the food was organic. It was just naturally organic. It didn't have to have a special label to say it was organic. It just was. And that's what people ate. They ate the wonky vegetables as they came. They weren't grown to look in a certain way for a supermarket shelf. People washed their veg, they cleaned them up, they peeled them, they made amazing things. They knew how to cook. Everything wasn't pre-packaged and made into a simple thing that you shove into the microwave. You didn't have the minerals and the nutrients and the vitamins pulled out of those things. You didn't have additional things of preservatives and goodness knows what other things, the enzymes and things shoved into them and fortified with this or with extra sugar added here. It was genuine, wholesome, natural, healthy food. We seem to have lost that in this modern world. So I very much espouse the old way. What I hate really is the fact that where animals are concerned, we've turned them from being part of the farm, that they work on the farm, that we used to have perhaps meat once or twice a week as a speciality, as something that we would look forward to. It wasn't necessarily part of our daily diet back in those days. But now it's almost expected that meat comes first. It's been industrialized. And henceforth, of course, the animals have been treated so badly. They've been grown with special hormones to make them grow so rapidly. Their lives are short. They're kept in smaller pens and cages. Their lives are quite horrendous. Nobody would want to live like that. It's not very humane. And of course, we treat the meat with such disrespect. They turn up in the fast food restaurants in all sorts of different guises. And it's become a bit of a race to the bottom on how you process that meat and what sort of things are in the pies and the various different fast food burgers and goodness knows what, you know, the mince and things. You just don't know what's in it anymore or the quality of it. And although there are supposedly, you know, what would you call it, quality control, we still don't know. We don't know where the provenance of that meat is, and we probably know that the poor animal that is in there or part of the animal has had a pretty miserable existence, but we don't give it the time of day, which I think is extremely sad. So I totally agree that we should be eating less meat. I don't think that we should be getting rid of meat altogether by any means. I think we should be eating much more wholesome meat, that animals should be farmed and their lives totally more respected. And that's why I say I go back to these old farming methods, the smaller farms, the more local farms, more wholesome, more organic farms, because that's where our health is going to come from, especially in a world that we're now facing, in which, thanks to a medical procedure that most people have been forced to have or cajoled into having, has now reduced our immune systems, it seems, and therefore we need less of the processed foods in which we don't know what's going in it, especially as it's now rumoured and being passed that insects of all things will be put in as some form of, I don't know, protein or bulking agent in order to make the processed food go further, which just sounds absolutely abysmal to me. We need that wholesome food. We need that old-fashioned caring farmers on much more, rather than the large-scale industrial farming that we've seen in recent years since the Second World War. So if a supermarket, for example, is deciding that it's going to reduce the amount of meat that it sells, clearly that's an opportunity. It's an opportunity for perhaps, if they don't want to sell it, somebody else will. Oh yes, we used to have butchers. Do you remember? On the high street, we used to have those professional butchers who not only knew how to carve up an animal carcass and present all the different elements of an animal, who could advise you what was in it, how good it was, what sort of meals, and how to cook it. We could take it home, we could look at it. And in the old days, of course, those butchers were collecting their meats from the nearby farms. So they knew exactly how the animal was brought up. These days you go into a supermarket and the butcher there, if anything, has probably no idea where the animal has come from, how it was brought up, where the fields are, or any of that. It's just instant service, hacked up on a bit of polystyrene, and away you go. Take your chance. You don't know what's really in that animal and how it's been, what kind of life it's lived. So I think if the supermarkets don't want to do it, let's have butchers come back to the high street. Let's go back and have those professionals who knew their stuff. And let's have more localized farms that are providing stuff. The thing for me that the supermarkets ought to be doing is, instead of reducing the meat from their shelves, they should be reducing the amount of processed foods. Foods that have no nutrients and no vitamins, that are quick to cook, quick to digest, that offer you nothing. I often think, why would you put anything into your mouth that is purportedly to be food and yet has no nutrients or vitamins or any kind of goodness that is there for you? But people do. And I think mostly because people have outsourced their trust on what is in food, and believe that these lovely companies with their big boxes and shiny colours and all this packaging that they think is full of goodness and wonderment, but actually seems to be full of empty promises and lack of nutrition. That's just my opinion. You may totally disagree, and I'd be interested in your comments in the boxes below.